Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Ali Fiducia, the co-founder of Psychedelic Support. And before I introduce our speakers today, I did want to mention that we just launched a brand new free psychedelic harm reduction course. And we'd love for you to check it out and spread the word with your communities. It's got a lot of great information about these substances and risk factors that people should be aware of in different environments and ways to stay safe and mitigate risk if people choose to engage with psychedelics. So I'm going to drop the course link into the chat, and you're welcome to check it out later on and spread the word. So it's a pleasure to have today as our speakers Joshua White. He is the founder and director of Fireside Project, which is a brand new site that's going to be launching next week on Wednesday, April 14th. And this is going to be a peer support line for people to be able to call in and talk to someone that can support them if they're experiencing a challenging situation. And Joshua is going to tell us a lot more about that. And we've also had the pleasure of having Adam Rubin join us. He is the support line director. And they're together in person getting ready for the big launch. And he just developed part of the training that's being used to educate the peer providers that are going to be supporting individuals that call in. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Joshua. He has experience serving as a crisis counselor on a helpline and a psychedelic peer support volunteer at the Zendo Project. He's seen firsthand the role that compassionate peer support can play in community mental health. In addition to serving as a crisis counselor at San Francisco Safe and Sound's Talk Line and providing peer support at festivals, Joshua is a trial lawyer who practices civil litigation and is co-taught at a nationally renowned clinic at the Yale Law School, where he helps students generate and litigate public impact litigation lawsuits. Sounds like very important work. And Adam is a psychedelic harm reduction activist and crisis counselor. He has devoted his life to supporting others experiencing extreme states of consciousness and creating safety systems at events where people might choose to ingest a psychedelic substance. He has worked with many different harm reduction organizations and gives trainings to peer support volunteers at local communities and events, and works with medical teams in attempts to bring deeper understandings around effective ways to support people undergoing a psychedelic emergency. And so it's great to have you both here today, and we're going to have you both speak about this project, and there's going to be plenty of time for questions. So you can either save your question towards the end, or if you don't feel comfortable with that, you just drop them in the chat, and I will ask Joshua and Adam these questions when we get to the Q&A piece. So with that, I'll hand it over to you two.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ali. And thank you for inviting us to speak today. And it's really a pleasure to be able to speak to all of you. So as Ali mentioned, like I'll kind of talk for a little bit about like what is Fireside Project and what is the psychedelic peer support line, and then Adam will kind of go into more detail about like what our training consisted of, and we really just want to leave a lot of time for questions, and hopefully that'll make this hour together as useful as possible. So we started Fireside Project back in October of 2020, and as Ali said, the support line launches in just 5 days from now on April 14th, 2021. So we're super excited about that. So Fireside Project kind of grew out of this, I think, like kind of tipping point moment that that we're in right now. Access to psychedelics, as we all know, is expanding so rapidly. I think that pace is only going to continue to accelerate now that Senator Wiener's SB 519, which would decriminalize psychedelics in California, has moved out of committee. So there's so much happening, and access to psychedelics is expanding. That's been happening against backdrop of a mental health crisis that's really been like exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. And so we really felt like there was this acute need for people to really have a support line that's available to them during and after their psychedelic experiences. And so many years ago, I'd been, as Ali mentioned, I'm a practicing lawyer. I'd been thinking about leaving my career as a lawyer to become a psychedelic therapist. And as part of that exploration, I volunteered for the Zendo, and then I also volunteered at this fantastic support line here in San Francisco called the Talk Line. And one of the amazing parts about the Talk Line is that in addition to responding to incoming calls, our practice was to offer every person a follow-up call every single week. And so we built these kind of multi-year relationships with people that, even though it was not professional psychotherapy, my experience was that those experiences were incredibly therapeutic for the people who I was speaking to. And I think all the more so because, my sense was that not a lot of people can, are either insured or can afford therapy. And so I really kind of came out of that experience just appreciating how powerful support lines can be. And then so at the start of the pandemic, I was really just kind of spiraling into a dark depression. I was practicing civil litigation for a private law firm and not really feeling that it was very meaningful anymore for me. And I wanted to devote myself to the psychedelic movement in some way. And so I thought that it would be really cool and really helpful at this point in time, to create a support line and model it off of the Talk Line, in the sense that we would offer our clients weekly follow-up calls, because I thought that could really revolutionize the integration process. Imagine if every week after a trip of yours, you had someone calling you or texting you to just check in and see how that process was going. We're not going to be offering follow-up calls at the very beginning because we just want to have a sense of our call volume. But that idea of weekly follow-up calls is something that I think we're really excited about from an integration standpoint. And so, just to kind of give a general overview of what the Psychedelic Peer Support Line will do. So, we're going to be offering support by phone and by text message, and it will be to people who are, I guess we're sort of thinking about 4 groups of people who can reach out to us. The first group is people who are having psychedelic experiences. And so that can be someone in the midst of a very, very intense psychedelic experience, or maybe they're just having a really beautiful psychedelic experience and they really just want someone to connect with and to share their experience with. So that's the first group. The second group is, people who are kind of trip sitting for others. Oftentimes, one person may be trying to support a friend during a psychedelic experience, and things just get so intense, and the trip sitter themselves need support. So we think that that'll be a pretty big group of people who reach out to us. And again, I think the backdrop for a lot of this is, as access to psychedelics is expanding, people will be trying psychedelics, for the first time, and often they'll be, I think, doing that in with people or as part of communities that don't really have a whole lot of psychedelic experience. And so I think that it will probably be pretty common that one friend will agree to hang out with another during a psychedelic experience and just not really know what to do when the level of intensity on that trip kind of continues to increase. So then the third group of people who we'll be offering support to are people who are integrating past psychedelic experiences. And this is something where, like, lots of times when people are talking about Fireside, they refer to us as a hotline. And we always really try to push back against that, because I think hotline kind of, at least in my mind, it implies that a person is in some kind of a crisis in the moment. But really, I think we sort of see ourselves as being much, much broader than that. And one of the ways that we are broader than that is, is this integration support. And so, perhaps you had a psychedelic experience 20 years ago, and there are things about that experience that keep coming up for you. I think it'll be really powerful to have someone who can just help you process the meaning of those experiences that keep coming up. And then the final group of people that we offer support to is, are people who themselves provide psychedelic support to others, and maybe just kind of need someone who gets it, right? As I'm sure that many people here know, like, even though it can be such a beautiful experience to provide psychedelic support for others, whether that's as a therapist, as part of a clinical trial, et cetera, it can also be really, really draining. And so we want to offer a space for people in that category to reach out to us. And as I mentioned, we will be providing support by phone and by text message. And that was really like a very deliberate decision, because I think both of those kind of means of communication have advantages and a variety of advantages. So I think, for one thing, texting, generationally speaking, I think there are a lot of younger people who just don't talk on the phone very much, if ever. And providing support by text message can allow us to, I think, build connections with people for whom phone calls just aren't part of what they do. And then another thing is, especially during the pandemic, where people are often, sharing apartments and homes with others, there may not be the privacy to have a phone call, or you may be at a show and really, feeling the intensity of that psychedelic experience, and you just want to text someone to make sure, just to feel that there's another person there who's ready to support you. And even if you're, I think, lucky enough to have a psychedelic community, I think my experience on my support line in the past has been that there's something so incredibly powerful about the anonymity that comes with reaching out to someone who you don't know. So we will be providing support by text message, and then also by phone. So that's kind of a general overview of what the support line does. We're going to be open for limited hours during our pilot year. So we're going to be open from Thursday to Monday. For limited hours, Thursday through Sunday, it'll be 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. Pacific, and then Monday, just for a 4-hour period, 3 to 7 p.m. And that'll, we anticipate, be primarily integration calls. And in terms of what happens when you call call in or text into the support line, we sort of picked a model that was inspired by Whitebird, which is a crisis line in Eugene, where Adam has worked for a while. And the idea is, every person is initially all calls and text messages go to what we're calling a connector, and it's kind of like a receptionist or a triage nurse, and that connector's job is to get a sense of, well, what does this person need in this moment? Is it a crisis that the person is experiencing? Are they just looking for a referral to an integration circle or a psychedelic society, et cetera? or is it an integration call? And then the the connector will pair that caller with a volunteer who's available. And then we also have on every shift, we have shift supervisors, who are people who are kind of very experienced providing peer support, and can step in and support our volunteers, either by taking over calls completely, or just kind of silently monitoring the call and providing maybe real-time written feedback to the volunteer. So that's kind of generally speaking what happens when you reach out to the line. And I think want to emphasize that this is peer support. We're not offering psychotherapy, nor are we offering medical assessments, right? So we're really trying to be very clear in our messaging that this is not a substitute for 911. This is not a substitute for going to a psychiatrist. And I think for that reason, I think one of the parts of Fireside Project that I just find I realize I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, or I've created the Kool-Aid, but that I think is so beautiful is that we really see ourselves as supporting all of the different parts of the psychedelic ecosystem, right? It could be that there are a person can go into a ketamine clinic, for example, and have a really beautiful experience, and then maybe a couple of days later they're at home and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and they just really want to connect with someone. So we see ourselves as supporting, people like that. Or maybe you came back from, an ayahuasca circle in Peru and you just really, really need support. So I think we kind of see ourselves in a lot of ways as this like huge safety net that applies to really all of the players in the space. And I think one of the final things I'll say, and then I would love to kind of turn it over to Adam to talk more about our training, is we see at Fireside Project a significant research potential here. Not only because we'll eventually be doing these follow-up calls, but also because we think there will be a lot of people reaching out to us, and there's a lot of information that we can learn from people's experiences. So each of our we have a kind of HIPAA compliant CRM where our volunteers will be just entering kind of basic information, basic software fields. Is this, is a person calling for integration or because they're having an emergency? Were emergency services discussed? Did we end up de-escalating the person from a place of distress to a place of calm? And I think that this kind of information could be exceptionally powerful as exploring whether the support line is a risk reduction tool, right? And if so, I think that the role that we could play, especially in decrim jurisdictions, is just going to be really, really powerful. Because even though we're not, as I said, a substitute for calling 911 if a person is actually in immediate danger, sometimes people are just in a significant state of emotional distress and they don't know who to call. And if they call us, there's a possibility that we can, or text us, there's a possibility that we can really take some of the burden off of unnecessary calls to emergency rooms and unnecessary calls to 911. So that's something that we're super excited about. We're also exploring, sending out post-call surveys, to clients that will kind of explore some of these questions over were emergency services discussed, and related questions. I mean, I think in the longer term, the kind of sky's the limit on the types of survey-based studies that we could end up doing. We're fortunate enough to have an advisory board that includes some really fantastic researchers from UCSF and other universities, and so we're excited about the possibility of really partnering in peer-reviewed academic studies that allow us to really study the experiences that our community members have had in a totally safe and ethical consent-based way, of course, and then sharing the lessons with the community so that we can fulfill our mission, which is to help people minimize the risks and fulfill the potential of their psychedelic experiences. So one of the questions that I haven't got into, and then I'll turn it over to Adam, is like, so who are the actual people who are going to be on the support line? We received about 215 applications for 30 spots on the support line. I think it's up to 34 now. Each of those people have gone through a 36-hour training that Adam developed. So I would love to turn it over to Adam and just ask him to talk about, like, how did we approach that training, and how did the training go, and what were some of the components of the training?
All right, thank you, Josh. So before I start the whole spiel on training, I also want to invite people to type into the chat what their curiosities are, just so I can make sure I'm explaining things that seem very relevant to maybe your desires out of what you want to get from this interaction here. Because I'll give you like the general idea around the training, but then maybe there's particular facets, questions like, what does it look like to support someone on the line? What exactly can one offer to someone having a difficult experience through a phone or text service? So we have limitations, of course, not being there in person and whatnot. But either way, I'll just go into it. And if you have things you want to add into the chat, please do. Okay, so, right, we'll get into the things that we are looking for in like a volunteer shift lead or other roles, and what credentials or backgrounds are probably very helpful to that. So before I answer that question, I'm just going to read a quote here from Stan Groff. Some of you may be familiar. Stan Groff is one of the fathers of transpersonal psychology, did extensive research with LSD psychotherapy before it was made illegal. And he has a number of amazing books on these subjects of non-ordinary states of consciousness. And this quote here is, to me, what all of this work comes down to, and what we are trying to impart and embody with our own. So here's the quote. It goes, "The capacity to be there for another person, to remain unperturbed no matter what form the process takes, to trust and to support without judgment and even without intellectual understanding what holotropic work." So that is a sentence out of the book The Stormy Search for the Self by Stan and Christina Groff. And to me, that is kind of the core of what we're trying to train within ourselves and others who are coming to this work. That it's more about being a calm, grounded, reassuring, anchoring presence than it is about certain techniques we might use to help someone get to a particular place we might think they need to get to, or some kind of an understanding of the way the psyche works necessarily, aside from the fact that there's a process happening and we can support it in the ways that it needs to happen. So as part of our training process, we emphasized a cultivation of qualities of being through exercises, meditations, and experiential practices, while also with an adjunct to that, giving a cognitive and intellectual understanding of psychedelics, the backdrop to these statements on holding space, and on integration as a whole. So we did create a cognitive foundation and understanding, but we also really wanted to emphasize skill-based learning and cultivation of qualities of being, because in the end, I truly believe that our presence is more important than our technique, and that from where we are, how we are being in the moment, all action stems from that place. So if you come into an experience where you're feeling a little ungrounded, that which you're communicating to somebody in an escalated or sensitized state will receive that over your words of saying like, I'm okay, I'm grounded, I'm fine, but really you're putting out a different message with your beingness. So how we did that in the training, aside from like the cognitive understanding of all of this was done through slideshows and normal presentations. The experiential practicing was what we did, because it all had to be remote. We created breakout rooms and used exercises that I've learned through either my own like going to workshops and studies. I'm also a crisis counselor on a crisis line, so so we emphasized skills like active listening, reflection, validation, normalization, and basically skills that turn us into a mirror of acceptance for what is. So really holding the reflection of what's happening right now is what's happening right now, and we will create a space around that for it to evolve in its own way without getting in the way or trying to fix something. Then we also had to condition and train ourselves to remain non-reactive, because we all want to fix we all want to make someone better. It's like, oh, you're having a hard time, let's see if we can make you. So we wanted to tone that part of us down. And with those practices, I took from my own experiences doing things like oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm blanking on this. Vipassana meditation, for one example. I've done a partial training in Hakomi as a modality, and there's lots of amazing cultivation of qualities through that. And these other practices of authentic relating. There's a group out of Oregon called Solsara that does these kinds of things too. So I took from a variety of different places and brought them together in a way that I felt would really focus on a human to human connection rather than a heady intellectual discourse on depth psychology, which is all very important models of consciousness that we can all bring to the work, but it is also, to me, an adjunct rather than what we are, starting with necessarily. You start with who you are, then all the other information can support making clarity around what's happening here. Once the 36-hour training completes, which it is complete now, and we have people on the line, we'll have opportunity for peer review and supervision. So, so people's learning and growth and training goes beyond those initial Zoom weekends, where we'll have experienced people modeling calls for newer trainees. And then at some point, new trainees will be taking calls and having someone supervise them. And after each call, it can be discussed on that, like what was working there. Were you feeling ungrounded in that part? Like, how can you reground yourself in times where it's intense? So that there's a continual growth together that is happening while working the line. eventually, yeah, everyone on the line will be taking calls on their own and be able to kind of basically train the next group of hires and volunteers that come through. So that's kind of a basic idea of those aspects of the training process. So
Can I just like follow on with one quick thing? And like, I think a big part of what we're trying to do within the organization is to really like cultivate community within the organization, because like so much learning does happen in community. And so as part of that, we'll have weekly, we're calling them community circles, where volunteers and supervisors can talk about the calls that they had and how they approached calls. We're going to have a series of kind of ongoing education opportunities for our volunteers. And so we're really, just to sort of highlight something Adam said, seeing this as just an ongoing learning process, rather than like the training just being complete after our 36 hours.
yeah, there's a right spot. Yeah, there's an aspect of that allows us to basically remember that we're always learning, that we're never done learning. So I'm just going to kind of go through some of these requests and questions in the chat here. And so the first one is Jen is asking, what kind of experiences / credentials do folks need to come prepared with to be a volunteer, shift lead, or other key roles? And so there's no expressed or explicit background someone needs per se. That by being a peer support line, we kind of want it to be open to anyone who might consider themselves a peer. Of course, having all trainings and things in your background are great and could potentially be beneficial to you. But we've also had a number of people we interviewed who have lots of experiences and credentials who, in our own assessment, maybe look really good on paper, but not the kind of grounded role that we might be looking for. So that's an aspect of this too. There's like an aspect of like who you are in some sense is being received and taking precedent over the credential aspects, because who you are in this situation should be a grounded, caring, calm presence.
Yeah, it was actually really, really interesting, like to go through the interview process and to just notice that, some people who are, therapists and clinicians had this amazing presence, and then other people who were software engineers may have also had that. And then, but on the flip side, having advanced degrees doesn't by itself, necessarily bring presence. So it was a really interesting process to kind of notice that as we were thinking through, really from, I think, the lens of, if you were in the midst of an intense experience, or a loved one was, does this person sort of have that kind of presence that you would want? Now, with all of that said, like a lot of our, when we were picking this first cohort of people, we really wanted people who could kind of hit the ground running, since we'll be getting calls, hopefully, from the very beginning. And so a lot of our volunteers do have backgrounds in, providing in-person support at the Zendo. Many of them are therapists, although everyone assign something to to sort of indicate that they won't be providing therapy, and certainly if one of our callers does is interested in connecting with like a professional therapist, like we'll be referring them to psychedelic.support, and to the MAPS integration list. So we really see ourselves as truly in synergy with clinicians and therapists.
Yeah, and so the next question by Brandon is there supervision from licensed therapists? So we don't have an official licensed therapist providing supervision in those kinds of like clinical contexts, at least not at this time.
I think in the long term, there's like when we think about how we're going to grow Fireside over the years, I mean, we would love to be able to, provide like licensure hours, to people who work on the support line, and that may, that would involve, having an actual licensed therapist serving as their supervisor. From an insurance standpoint, that adds a few wrinkles. But it's something we have our eye on, because we do think that it could be just such a fantastic way with the proper supervision to earn those hours towards being a psychedelic therapist.
So the next question from Tiffany says, how do I provide support to friends who want to explore psychedelics but have unresolved childhood trauma? Well, I think that's a really big question, because if they have unresolved childhood trauma, it's likely that the psychedelics will bring that up. And if they're thinking of exploring psychedelics, they should be aware that that is a possibility or a potentiality, and they should have proper care, and someone trained in working with that kind of energy present either during and after as like follow-up therapeutic support. And you as their friend may or may not be the right person for that. And so it's something that you want to be really mindful of if someone knows that they're doing a lot of trauma work with these substances. You want to be very careful and cautious about that, because on the flip side, on the dark side of this is that there's a lot of people trying to self-heal, self-medicate with psychedelics without professional care, and opening up into trauma without those kinds of safety systems in place could actually be more harmful or damaging beyond the experience itself. That it's not, I mean, most of everyone I've talked to we're really trying to get the message out that these are not some magic pill or medicine that suddenly you take it and your trauma's gone and that's it. Like there's a lot more inner work that has to happen alongside these things that can open a doorway into the work. So, I guess,
I would throw in.
Mhm.
Sorry. I was just going to ask you if you could maybe describe a little bit, maybe how people could de-escalate a situation in person, maybe if they're at a festival, and even what a challenging experience might look like for a friend or someone you might come upon, and how individuals could act and support in that way.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, how challenging experiences can arise. We want to always consider the two basic aspects of what creates the experience, and that's set and setting. So, mental set. The set is the internal landscape, our personality, identity, our feelings at the onset, whether we're feeling nervous, anxious, whether we trust those around us. And then our setting is what is around us. Is it highly stimulating? Is it low stimulation? Do we have control over what's happening, whether that's the music or the temperature in the room? Or are we at an outdoor wild setting with lots of nature? Is it a festival or rave where there's lots of sounds and people we don't know? So those are things that once we understand that that's what's making the experience to some degree, then when something is causing challenges, we can look to those things. So maybe someone's feeling overwhelmed because of all the stimulation. Maybe someone is feeling scared because they're actually with people they don't trust. Maybe the experience is so dramatically different than what their worldview was prior to that moment that it's a really hard thing to accept. So that's a set thing. And so what we do as the support people, we're part of the setting. So if the setting because we're outside of the person's internal landscape. So as the external environment that we are a part of, we can create a space of calming, grounding presence, and a space of acceptance. And so if your friend, let's say, has, and we anticipate people will call in saying, hey, me and my friends are journeying tonight. We took all these things or whatever. And one of my friends is like curled up in a ball on the floor, like repeating over and over again that they're dying, or they feel like they're dying, or whatever it is. What do I do for this person? Like, they're not dying, they just keep saying they are. And so the first thing that we would encourage is that the friend who's calling us, or you as a friend of someone who's having a hard time, work on grounding yourself. Think to yourself, when was the last time I had a drink of water? Or what do I need right now so that I can actually show up for this other person's experience? And by showing up for their other experience, we're also creating a safe bubble for them. We're saying, like, okay, I'm just going to be right here next to them as this process is unfolding. And to be able to trust that process, and reflect a trust in that process, is a reassuring thing for someone who's like, is this okay? It's like, yes, this is okay. We're going to get through this. We just have a little bit of time, and just allow what's coming through right now. There's nothing wrong necessarily about what's happening. And exploring with that person what they think they need in that moment. Do you need a blanket right now? Do you need something for your own security and feeling of safeness? Because once a feeling of safety can be established, then acceptance and allowing, potentially like surrendering into what is present, can be had. So once again, start with yourself, make sure you're grounded, and then connect with your friend from that grounded place, and be that reassuring voice of like, we all took the same thing, and we're going to get through it. Of course, every situation is going to be different, and the ways that challenging psychedelic moments arise can be dramatically different. There's times that we are unable to communicate to a person via words, and they may be so immersed into something that that our connection to them has nothing to do with the words we're communicating, but once again, more the nervous system attunement that our bodies can communicate. So, I mean, if you've done much research in like polyvagal theory, there is a lot to be said about the attuning of nervous systems. That you get close to someone who's in anxiety, you might start to feel some of their anxiety. But if you focus on grounding yourself and being an anchor, suddenly they might come down with you. It's an interesting thing that humans have. So there's other questions here. We can go down the list. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Can you name it? You said poly something. Poly. Can you name that again? And can you spell it?
Polyvagal theory. It's a theory on trauma and how trauma works with the nervous system in the body. Polyvagal.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So that was amazing, Adam. So Jen asked, what kind of data do you capture from these interactions? Are there broader learning goals for these interactions are contributing to? So I should first say that we don't capture any data. People can choose. People can choose to give us as little or as much information as they would like. I think all support lines that I'm aware of, have kind of a, internal, HIPAA compliant database where you can just create data fields. So like if you've ever seen the annual reports of support lines, they'll tell you, we talked to this many people and there was this many were, male identified and female identified. And so I think what we're going to be doing, and all of that, of course, is just anonymized aggregated data. So we're going to be basically doing that, but just with a little bit, with just additional data fields, I think, that are kind of specific to, psychedelic experiences. And so things like what, if the person chooses to share what type of psychedelic substance they took or substances in the dose, obviously that information can be helpful in how we provide support to the person. Are they 1 hour into an LSD trip or 9 hours into an LSD trip, for instance? And then we'll be able to kind of, draw, inferences or conclusions from that data. For instance, you can run these kind of interesting reports where you see, all right, well, on how many occasions were, emergency services discussed, how does that vary with, whether the person had taken, LSD or psilocybin versus MDMA? What about combinations? So I think that I personally think that could be incredibly interesting from, again, we're starting from risk reduction as being our, kind of primary area of inquiry first. And so I think we'll be able to draw a lot of conclusions on, how effective is the risk reduction that we're providing. And then I think in the longer term, it'll really just depend. I mean, I'm very interested in understanding what sorts of integration support work the best, and how does that vary depending upon different factors. And so we really hope to study that. But if anyone has specific areas of inquiry that they're curious about, we're really very open to partnerships with researchers, and how can we use the anonymized experiences of our communities in a way that will allow us to learn as much as possible and then share that with the community.
Thanks. I have a follow-up question. As a researcher, very mindful of the informed consent process that happens for clinical trials, where people give information and data after they know exactly what the data is going towards and their information is going to be used for. And I totally agree that the information collected in the site is going to be very valuable for fine-tuning the process around risk reduction. But I'm also curious about people calling in altered states, and would their full name be asked, and maybe the next day if they wanted to withdraw the information they gave to the site, if there will be a mechanism for that, and just how you're thinking about the data collection process.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, our assumption, would be that a person who is, under, in an altered state, cannot consent. If the person did want to, ask us to delete, anything that we'd recorded about them, absolutely, we'll have a process for that. And there's no even though we do have kind of like blank fields that people can fill out, we will never be asking questions just for the purpose of filling out filling out any data fields. I think in terms of, I always kind of come back to this principle that we're providing, peer support. And so things like a person's last name, a person's address, these are not really, that typically is not really relevant to, providing actual peer support. And then, if we were going to ask people to fill out surveys, we would want to make sure that, either the person is not altered when we ask them, or, if we do ask at the very end of a call, if the person is going to receive a survey, the survey itself would be totally anonymous. And our kind of view is that we really welcome the rigor, for example, of an IRB process. And so, as I mentioned, some of our advisory board members are on staff at UCSF, and we've actually been actively inviting an IRB process, because we are so serious about obtaining obtaining informed consent. And even if, like, for example, even if Hipaa doesn't technically apply to us, still following Hipaa because our clients, privacy is so important to us, especially because of the subject matter of the support line.
All right. So it looks like we got 10 minutes left and a few more questions in the chat. So I'll just sort of start going down them again. So Lola says, I'm in Australia and we are way behind and just starting to research the benefits, in parentheses, still all illegal. I'd like to be educated further on supporting others as we do have a growing underground service offering support. And then in parentheses, I'm a registered counselor.
Can I start with one quick thing?
Okay.
So we accept volunteer applications from all over the world. Initially, we're going to start out offering service to United States callers only, but a number of our volunteers live in other countries. We have someone from Poland, I think someone from maybe a couple people from the UK. And in fact, some of the most challenging shifts for us to fill from a time perspective are the 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. Pacific time shifts. And so I don't know what that would be in Australia, but it would probably be, I don't actually know what it would be, but it's actually been easier to fill some of our challenging shifts with international visitors. And so we would definitely encourage anyone who's here who lives in other countries to apply. And we actually have applications open on a rolling basis, as we've talked, and you can find that on our website. As we've mentioned, one of the big questions for us is we don't know what the demand is going to be, but there have been times already where we've really been wanting to fill some of these really hard to fill shifts and looked to that pool of rolling basis applicants. So please encourage your communities to apply no matter where you live.
Yeah, well, and on top of that, it sounds like you are aware of some of the underground communities in Australia. They all may have some more details on like where they're getting trainings and learning. There's also a ton of things online now, some of them free courses and some of them paid courses. So it's kind of going to be a little bit of looking around the internet and perhaps in your local spheres. I know that Australia has their own like regional burns, which is like one way to tap into a psychedelic community. So as Terrence McKenna says, find the others. So it seems like you're already tuning in since you're coming to this event here. Okay. So Andrew says, how are volunteers being trained to assess the difference between a psychospiritual crisis and a crisis which might potentially require medical assistance? If the line goes dead or it seems like a caller may need to seek medical attention, what is the protocol that volunteers are trained to initiate?
Yes, yeah. So this is obviously a very, very challenging question, a big topic that we've thought really a lot about. As I've said, we this is peer support, and so and we are not trained to, and we will not be doing kind of medical assessments. And so our policy is really going to be, if the person is in immediate danger, to encourage them to either, if we know their address, to call 911, or to encourage them to call 911. Now, obviously, it can be very, very challenging to kind of identify, the differences between a psychospiritual crisis, I feel like I'm dying, versus an actual like medical, a medical issue. And I think it's just going to require experience. This is why we have shift supervisors. But I think it's really important for us to be aware of the kind of the limits of our role. We could have had kind of set up a line that was, that included a medic team, and that's just a different type of line. It's not necessarily a peer support line. And so there are limits, and and I think it's going to be a challenging process, I think. But I do think, in my experience, like, there is a difference between, a person kind of going through ego death on the one hand versus, the line going dead on another, or a person describing a physical injury that they've sustained, a person describing physical pain that they're feeling. But again, to allude to something I said earlier, like, we often just won't have a person's physical address because it's not part of the information that we gather. It's not really relevant to peer support. And so I think a lot of what we may have to be doing is, to sort of share with people, like, I'm concerned about your physical safety in this moment based on what you've told me, and articulating the limits.
Yeah, I mean, in short, if we can't ensure that the person calling us is not in danger to self or others, we direct them to get safety through emergency services or otherwise.
Maybe we could chat a minute about if you are in person with someone, maybe some physical signs that you could check on to see if a person may need medical assistance, like any type of signs or symptoms, if there's a friend there that you would have them check on. If you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, before I touch upon that, I do want to just give a quick shout out to Hanifa Naya Washington joined us here. She is another one of the co-founders and cultivator of beloved community at Fireside. So I just wanted to say hello to Hanifa. So yeah, going into the question about medical safety, if you are there in person. So I'm not a medical professional. Josh is not a medical professional. What I've learned in terms of these things comes from my work at festivals with medical teams, and one particular medical team in general, or in specific, I work a lot with is RGX Medical. And so Richard Gottlieb shares with me some of his views on, like, the major signs and symptoms that one should look for. And I may not hit them all on the mark here because I'm not him, but if there is difficulty breathing, if there is fainting or seizures, signs of like dehydration or heat stroke, these are some basics to keep in mind. But like I said, you probably want to ask a medical professional about those details rather than us. Those are kind of the basics. The last question, with 2 minutes left here that we have, are there classes in ethical, moral, legal, and Hipaa regulations?
I'm sure that there are. I don't actually know of any.
So there are. In my organization that I work for called Whitebird, it's a crisis center in Eugene, Oregon. We have our own documentation that we have to go through and training we have to do related to Hipaa regulations because of the fact that we are an establishment that takes medical records and document, like, things like that. So there is, like, things like that. Fireside is not specifically bound by Hipaa because we're not a medical organization, but we do have, for our own decision on moral and ethical standards, a desire to adhere to Hipaa regulations out of confidentiality. So we're not necessarily officially training people in Hipaa, but we are making sure all of our stuff is Hipaa protected based on our own emphasis on the importance of confidentiality, as an example. And then we also have written our own ethics which are in our manual, our manual will be publicly available. Like you could read our manual when we get it up on the website. And there's tons of areas to read upon ethics, especially when it comes to therapy and psychedelic support. The manual of psychedelic support has a whole chapter on ethics, which is, I think, pretty spot on. Then you have like the ethics of spiritual guides written by the Council of Spiritual Practices. It's another great list. And then there's a book that is kind of like, it seems to be like the main book of ethical discourses, at least at this time, called The Ethics of Caring by Kylia Taylor, for more information on those things.
Excellent. Well, this has been so informative, and as psychedelics become more mainstream, having these conversations around safety and best practices of how we can support others and make sure everyone has great information and resources available for when things start to go sideways is hugely critical for the movement in general. So I just dropped in the chat a link to Fireside and the phone number there. And I hope you'll join their launch. It's going to be Wednesday next week at 3 p.m. Pacific.
Yeah, we're gonna have an opening ceremony that Hanifa will be leading. I think it's going to be really beautiful, and you can find a link on our website to the Zoom registration.
Excellent.
Hanifa, can you drop that in the? Do you have that handy? If you could maybe drop it in the.
Okay. Yeah, we'll try to get in the chat here. And we covered recently, we launched a free psychedelic harm reduction course. And this is really to give people information and questions to think about if they're taking psychedelics in different environments. And we checked in with a number of different professional harm reduction experts to learn how people can reduce risk, be prepared, and what to do if challenging experiences arise. So I hope you'll check out that course and spread the word, because this is really what we want to promote and advocate for is acknowledging risk exists, and there are ways that we can work together to keep everyone safe. So this is super exciting to see Fireside come on board next week, and I hope you all will follow their work and follow these great resources that are being put out. So thanks for joining today. And next month, we'll be having Bia Labache join us from the Chacruna Institute, and we'll learn more about our work there. So I hope everyone has a great weekend, and good luck with the launch.
Thank you, Ali, and everyone. Please help us spread the word about Fireside Project, so lots and lots of people will reach out to us, and we can hopefully help them.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Ciao.